What are your top 3 most difficult Nullscape enemies? Let's see how they hold up by the end of this video. Nullscape is a chaotic, fast-paced, and insanely demanding game. What makes it this way? The enemies. Whether it's Scrapmaw, Cadence, Voidbound Guardian, or others, this game is overloaded with enemies. Some insanely easy, others almost impossible. We will be ranking every single one of Nullscape's 18 main enemies based on difficulty, including a bonus section with 9 extra enemies. Some secret, some removed, some curse-based, and some I bet you've never even heard of. Note that this video is based on my opinion, meaning it may be different from yours. Keep your top 3 enemies in mind because I've ranked basically any enemy in this game you could think of. Let's see how this goes. Let's start with Cadence first. She is by far one of the coolest enemies in the game. By the way, yes, she. According to the wiki, Cadence's pronouns are any, but her creator, KirbyTG, prefers she, her. But how does Cadence fare in game? Well, as you can likely guess, Cadence is going to be relatively high in this list for many reasons. First off, Cadence completely ignores shield iframes. Usually if your shield pops, you get brief iframes which allow you to regroup. But with Cadence, nope. Insta-death, as shown on screen. Second, Cadence's instruments become very difficult to track on large maps. Even with upgrades like radar module instruments and speed mobility upgrades which allow quick traversal, it can still be very challenging and require intense hyperfocus on Cadence, which can either easily result in dying to another enemy or leading to tons of risky plays. Plus, Cadence's instruments can completely cover trip mines, so you better pray you have radar module trip mines once you choose Cadence. Either that or collect the instruments from above, which is possible. The saving grace about Cadence, though, is that she only has one curse, Deadly Melody, which is relatively doable. But as you can imagine, this can single-handedly destroy Party Plus lobbies of 20 people and make LRS impossible in many cases. With all this in mind, Cadence deserves a very difficult rating in my eyes. Though it is doable, she has run-ending potential and completely changes the feel of the run, requiring prioritization that often gets hard to manage. Next, we have the beloved water imp Mart. If this was anything other than patch 5, Mart would be getting an easy, basically free rank. However, as many of you know, patch 5 made Mart a lot more difficult. Mart merges, his curses and Martpocalypse from Altars of Chance can make Mart come out of nowhere, and dying to Mart through the floor happens way too much lately. So Mart is unfortunately not free, as much as I'd want to put this gooper there. However, Mart is relatively doable. For one, Mart's side was greatly nerfed, only pushing you instead of directly insta-killing you. Second, Mart is more prone to get larger as the run progresses once you start using Purgatory Altars, the Jackpot Curse, and Altars of Chance more often. This means that Mart's insane speed only really shows up when you already have the speed to counter him. And honestly, even if you get an unlucky early Martpocalypse with bigger Marts and all of them merge, even then, mobility is usually enough to evade Mart just fine. As long as you're careful to avoid dying to Mart in the floor, this guy is super easy. That's why he's justifiably getting placed in the very easy tier. Our third enemy on the chopping block is Springer. Ugh, I hate this enemy. The sheer amount of times I've died to him in early game is crazy. Ranking him should be a no-brainer. Bro is going all the way at the bottom in F tier. What? I'm not ranking based on annoyance? Oh, you're right. This is a difficulty tier list. Well then, never mind. Anyways, Springer is obviously a huge nuisance, and with his awkward landings, tendency to easily kill you early in runs when you're low on speed, and his curse spring loaded that is so annoying and difficult to remember, this guy is more of a hindrance than a run ender, so he won't be high in this list. He seems most fitting for the somewhat difficult tier, as he's too annoying for me to call him easy, but he's not enough of a problem to go any higher than that. He also has a very low amount of curses, only 2 in non-chaos runs. Resonating shockwaves can cause problems associated with Bell, but dying to this is very rare even with this curse active. Somewhat difficult it is. Next, we have Telefragger. You already know this guy's ending up high in this list. This guy is Mr. Shield Popper and certified professional run ender. Dude, the amount of lobbies this guy ends is crazy, and it's way too easy to forget about Telefragger in basically any situation. Whether it be when all active Telefraggers are on you during LRS, or when Telefragger was on others for so long that you don't realize he's targeting you and you fly straight into him. Honestly, he proposes enough of a challenge on his own unmodified. Spamming abilities, using grind rails, and going in straight lines for gifts, all very common things, are easy opportunities for Telefragger to destroy you. But his curses complicate things even further, especially with ambush. This has caught me off guard and others many times. It applies a lot of pressure to an already difficult enemy, but is only intensified if you have accurate Telefragger, where he predicts where to teleport based on your velocity, much like Bell. All things considered, this goober is not to be underestimated. He's going in the very difficult tier, higher and more difficult than Cadence because, in my opinion, he applies a lot more pressure than Cadence does. Cadence is relatively manageable with focused teammates, whereas Telefragger is a lot more lethal to forget. With Cadence, you at least have the chance to collect instruments and save yourself, but with Telefragger, it's one and done. If you want to get better at Nullscape, don't forget to subscribe. I make multiple high-value, high-effort videos every month, which will all help you improve greatly at this game. For this video, anyone who subscribes or likes this video specifically has a 9.27% chance of getting easier enemies and curses during intermission. It's legit, trust. Don't end up stuck with run-ending combos. The next enemy in question is Operator. Honestly, I'm so excited to talk about this one. It's one of the main reasons I'm making this video, actually. I will be ranking Operator and its Voidbound variant separately. For the base operator, hands down, bro is going into the basically free tier. It's definitely the easiest, lowest maintenance enemy in the game. Letting go of all keys causes it to disappear basically immediately, and aside from malfunction, operator has 0 regular curses to add to the run upon selection. Although you have to stop moving, operator does not kill you if you're jumping, but you can help with evading other enemies, and you have an entire 3 seconds to react. This means that if you are quick with dealing with operator, it's literally the most free choice ever. Now, the same cannot be said about the Voidbound variant, Voidbound Operator. Even so, I'm willing to bet you consider this enemy to be a lot more difficult than you should be. Upon first seeing Voidbound Operator, it looks insanely impossible, especially since you only have about 0.5 seconds to react to each of its 3 attacks. Even so, this enemy does not attack randomly. He attacks at intervals which never change. He ticks a total of 45 times, and he attacks on 3 intervals. This means that if you count the ticks, you can perfectly predict Voidbound Operator with a small bit of time to spare, as discussed in my last video. Plus, another strategy I've heard floating around is counting ticks with seconds. Count to 5, then 3, then 3 again. These strategies make Voidbound Operator so much more doable. With these tactics in mind, Voidbound Operator is super doable for me. Even so, he's still enough to apply considerable pressure. Everything in mind, I'm placing him in the somewhat difficult tier, in one of the highest spots, due to him being relatively easy to mess up, but not quite difficult enough in my opinion to be run ending. Small tangent, but why are not enough people talking about how absolutely awesome this enemy design is? Dealing with him in game feels epic and very rewarding, and he's genuinely so satisfying. Am I the only one? Now we have Bell. This is definitely one of the easier ones. Bell's visual distortion sucks in some instances and can result in death, but it's not common to fall off because of Bell if you have mobility upgrades. And since you're going to basically only die to Bell by intentionally ringing it multiple times, this enemy rarely causes any problems. I would put it into basically free, but I can't. Its curses keep it out of that tier. Bell honestly has some of the most commonly avoided curses in the entire game. This includes Mighty Gong, Concussion, and more ringing, along with the aforementioned resonating shockwaves. These all suck. However, they are very easy to avoid, reroll, and skip, and the farther you get in the game, the less of a problem Bell becomes. Plus, choosing Bell is required for Pocket Bell, an upgrade many people, especially me and Wanted mains, are dependent on. With that in mind, Bell is super doable. It's going in a low spot in the very easy tier. It's finally time to talk about Husk. Now, my ranking for this one might shock some of you, but bear with me. As discussed in previous videos I've been in, Husk is an enemy that follows behind you constantly. He changes the feeling of the run entirely, completely removing your ability to move immediately backwards and causing you to need to constantly adapt. He is never not a problem, and Husk's purple color causes it to blend in. And with everything else going on and other enemies at play at all times, forgetting about Husk and dying or losing a shield is way too common. Genuinely, there is no stage of the game where Husk is not a problem. In literally every single one of its curses, except for further Husk pretty much, make Husk already harder than he is by adding more Husks, making him closer, constricting your movement even more, and other crazy stuff like Destroyer or Husk Block in Chaos mode. Basically, anyone you talk to will avoid Husk until absolutely necessary, be forced into it due to Purgatory or Alter Chance, or otherwise find Husk to be a massive nuisance. All in all, due to its design and mechanics, Husk is definitely one of Nullscape's biggest handicaps. It's going into the hardest this game has to offer, without a doubt. It has some of the most curses out of any enemy, is a problem in all stages of the game, and absolutely earns itself the highest tier on this list. ICBM is next. I don't know about you guys, but this is basically my first pick in early game every time. ICBM has only 3 curses, only 2 of which show up in early game, Scorched Earth and Bigger Blast, and they're both relatively doable. It does have a greater curse, Hollow Tiles, which is widely disliked, for good reason. After 2 ICBM blasts, a tile will temporarily break, leaving any uncollected gifts suspended in midair. This is an arguably worse version of Scorched Earth, which is a huge problem even if you have mobility. It can tear through high rises, and since loss of ICBMs are highly likely due to progression events and duplicate ICBM choices being made, it makes platform breaks virtually guaranteed. It can be run ending, but isn't the worst greater curse in the world. Hollow Tiles is the worst part of ICBM in my opinion. Otherwise, it's a relatively easy enemy to avoid, so as long as you're staying away from other players and preventing PvP is not too bad. Compared to other enemies, especially some of the bonus ones at the end of the video, I don't think this enemy belongs very high. As a result, it's going in the somewhat difficult tier, higher than Springer due to Hollow Tiles. On to Guardian and its Voidbound variant. These two are going to have very different final placements. Before we discuss Guardian's ranking, and by extension Voidbound Guardian's ranking, we need to discuss the logistics. First, as mentioned in my previous videos, all regular and voided Guardians enrage when an Ultra passage is used, which is not a very commonly known fact. This makes them a massive liability towards an otherwise relatively doable golden gift boost. Aside from this, their 2 curses, Shotgun and Camouflage, make surviving them much more difficult. Shotgun changes their shots to groups of bullets, while Camouflage hides them and increases their projectile speed. Though Camouflage sounds difficult, it normally doesn't make a huge difference, while Shotgun, in the case of regular Guardian at least, is relatively easy to get used to. It's also very rare to die to Guardian as long as you keep your distance, with the main death being if you get sniped. I personally don't consider Guardian very difficult. I've chosen to place it in the somewhat difficult tier, higher than Springer due to its endgame curse influence and Ultra Passage lethality, but lower than ICBM due to Hollow Tiles. As for Voidbound Guardian, oh jeez, this thing is a monster. Have another look at the shotgun bullets for this thing and the sheer size and intensity of the beams that spawn as a result. Voidbound Guardian is no joke. Even with speed upgrades, Voidbound Guardian applies insane levels of pressure, and it's way too easy to lose your shields if you aren't fast enough or are using a class that prevents evading it quickly. Although choosing Voidbound Guardian is sometimes a must to avoid certain greater curses in endgame, this choice is never made out of comfort, as this enemy is insanely difficult to survive or keep your shield with. I'm relatively confident putting this in the hardest this game has to offer tier, because it really is. It goes higher than Husk due to being more consistently lethal and dangerous, even without curses. Aside from Scrapmaw, whose insane attacks we will discuss later in this video, no enemy has attacks quite as large as Voidbound Guardian. Time to talk about the ability Constricting Flesh. All around, this enemy is so problematic. It will rarely directly kill you, but deaths due to being infected, running out of double jumps, and having no ability are way too common, at least for me. I'm sure I'm not the only one. In extreme, Flesh shoots projectiles at tiles with gifts on them, along with what it already does. Way to be even more annoying. Thank God Wanted mains at least don't have to deal with that. Well, either way, the enemy itself is really annoying, which is intensified by its many curses, especially Mass Infection, the greater curse. Luckily, Blighted Jump Pads is mostly a nothing burger, and Bloodier Meat isn't as bad as Mass Infection. With all that in mind, Flesh is mostly just a bother and not much more. If you're fast enough, always anticipate Flesh, and always stay above ground when fleshed, he's pretty doable. He's going into the somewhat difficult category, higher than ICBM for me due to it also having a greater curse and being slightly more consistently problematic than ICBM, who needs hollow tiles or scorched earth to be even slightly as much of a nuisance as Flesh is without curses. Also, as you're seeing, somewhat difficult is a very common category, but what really matters is which ones are the hardest in this category and which ones are the easiest. What do you guys think it's going to be? And now for the computer program turned pillar, Kolóna. I genuinely love this enemy. It's so fun to survive and it has a very cool design. In terms of difficulty, this enemy definitely stands out. In order to survive, you have to be using your ability at the number Kolóna flashes once it spawns. Now, it's pretty easy to mess this up, very easy in fact, but there are also many methods of avoiding this guy, many of which are mentioned in my Nullscape Ultimate Guide, using your ability for several numbers, tapping your ability each tick, and more. There are also other strategies, such as tracking its movement. Its movement is never random, and the pillar's positioning can help you indicate what number it is, even if you have the Lost Embers curse. You can also intentionally pick up metal if you're in absolute desperation, as if you have metal, Kolóna will count up insanely fast, not kill you, and never spawn for the rest of the level. Burning Bouquet also does absolutely nothing in terms of the feel of gameplay, as Kolóna and Razorbloom spawn at similar intervals even without this curse. So basically, the limited curses are all doable, and Kolóna itself isn't too bad, although it does provide a considerable challenge. For that, I'm putting it in the somewhat difficult tier. Its challenge is greater than Flesh, but not as difficult as Voidbound Operator in my opinion. And now, we have Voidbreaker. This enemy is probably the most exciting endgame enemy in Nullscape when I was first starting out, but the more I've played this game, the more I believe Voidbreaker is incredibly easy. Though you cannot evade the swords by jumping, positioning yourself away from them is very doable, and even in Extreme, where there are 4 swords total without curses, it's relatively manageable and predictable. Despite this opinion of mine, Voidbreaker is not ending up low on this list. That is 1000% because of its curses. Voidbreaker curses are insane, with 2 of them being virtually guaranteed run enders, unless you're playing with literal gods. Blade Carousel is the only one that adds decent challenge without a massive difficulty spike, but the other 2, oh gosh. Blade Bombardment spawns more swords and makes you able to take damage from behind as well as the front, which creates some impossible dodges. And Ballet of Blades is probably the most feared greater curse in the game. It is so uncommonly selected that I have literally never seen it properly in game, but taking even the briefest look at Voidbreaker Ballet footage shows you why Voidbreaker is a darn menace. It would be a disservice to place Voidbreaker low on this list just because it's easy without curses. Choosing Voidbreaker right before a greater curse pick is a genuinely massive risk. As a result, I believe Voidbreaker deserves to be in the very difficult tier, at the lowest of this tier, since without curses, Voidbreaker is super doable otherwise. We're almost done with the base enemies, covering the bonus ones after these. It's time to discuss Baby and its Voidbound variant. Now, Baby is one of the most feared enemies in early game, and rightfully so. It's arguably one of the fastest entities, and it's often very annoying. As you get farther into the game, Baby does get somewhat manageable, even if you have Pacifier or Problem Child for example, due to speed upgrades and otherwise just being very used to Baby, since you had it for so long. Tantrum on the other hand is where things get a lot more difficult. If you watch my Nullscape Mistakes video, you'll know my thoughts on this greater curse, but honestly, even with all my opinions in mind, this curse is admittedly far from the worst greater curse, and is often the more wiser choice over curses like Hollow Tiles and Blade Bombardment for example, depending on your goals. With that in mind, Baby itself isn't too bad, albeit annoying, but I believe somewhat difficult is fair for this bugger, putting him above Flesh since Baby is a much more active, faster threat, but lower than Kolóna since Kolóna is a problem regardless of speed. The story is much different for Voidbound Baby. By far the enemy I was most afraid of when starting out, this enemy is incredibly fast, very intimidating, and overwhelming if you're just getting used to him. I'm a lot more experienced than I used to be, and a lot of experience with enraged babies made me not consider Voidbound Baby to be as difficult. But even with my increased confidence, Voidbound Baby applies a consistently significant amount of pressure and forces you to focus and constantly predict the trajectory of its dashes to more properly stay out of the way of its charges. I'm sure many experienced players can echo my sentiment. It's a considerably more difficult variant of Baby, one that absolutely deserves the very difficult tier. It's going above Voidbreaker since its base form is much harder than Voidbreaker in my opinion, and lower than Cadence because Cadence is an added burden on everyone at once, whereas one Voidbound Baby only targets one person. On to the newest enemy of the game, Sigil. Now I'm gonna be very honest, I think Sigil is a sleeper enemy. In other words, it's easy. Like, yeah, it does add some difficulty and there are obvious concerns in PvP due to that large beam, but due to the measures that the devs implemented to prevent this and the fact that Sigil's beam is always very predictable, I consider Sigil to be really not that difficult at all. The only thing that really makes it difficult, honestly, is the fact that it veers you off course, but this is very manageable, and any other enemy can do this anyways. Consider this, as of the time of writing, Sigil has absolutely no curses. This means that choosing Sigil does not add any risk of a greater curse or regular curse. This also means that Sigil's attacks and difficulty do not change at all, which means once you're a pro at Sigil, it's very easy to consistently avoid. Honestly, call me crazy, but Sigil is going into very easy. I know, that's wild. I'm lumping a level 15 requirement enemy with Mart, but I'm doing that because in its current state, I don't believe it's deserving of having such a high level requirement at all. It would need some curses or maybe some changes first. That being said, I will be putting it in the highest spot of very easy to not disservice it as much. The last main game enemy in question is Scrapmaw, our beloved Terraria and the very hungry caterpillar reference. I'm sorry, I think that's hilarious. Scrapmaw is the enemy with the highest level requirement, that being 20. It used to be 25 for added context on how high pressure this enemy is. Scrapmaw spawns client-sided lasers that cover an insane amount of area when it spawns. You can die either to those layers or contact damage. Scrapmaw forces you to be good at multitasking. I'm sorry, I know I'm still laughing, but I'm gonna leave it in. Cause seriously, it's crazy that Scrapmaw is literally related to the very hungry caterpillar in some sense. Look at the wiki, it's true. But anyways, yes, Scrapmaw basically forces you to juggle high speeds with other enemies, structures, and positioning yourself just right to not lose your shield or die. I don't think there's any argument that could be made to suggest that this guy is easy, really. There is one interesting point though. At high enough speeds through sea mines, gliding, or other means, you can completely evade the lasers. Thank God this enemy spawn is semi-infrequent, being every 30 seconds or so. Aside from that though, you have to get good at positioning. No jumping or evading will help. As you can imagine, Scrapmaw is going quite high. He'll be landing at the very top of the very difficult tier. As hard as he is, in my opinion, I don't believe he's the hardest in the game, and he's not as intimidating the more you practice with him. The hardest part for me, honestly, is not getting got by his contact damage, bruh. Happens too much to me. Aside from that though, definitely a deserving spot. If you're still watching by this point in the video, I really appreciate you because you just made it to probably my most favorite part of this video. This is where things get a lot more unpredictable. I have 9 additional enemies to rank. Some of them you may have heard in passing, some you may have never seen at all, and others are only accessible by devs. For this section, I will also be adding a completely new row, the unknown row, and you'll see why that's relevant here in a second. For any enemy whose difficulty is unknown, I will be ranking them against each other for what I think their difficulty would be. Let's get into it, starting with arguably the craziest enemy on this entire list so far, Visage. Haven't heard of him? Don't blame ya, because this enemy is a developer exclusive that was recently revealed to exist in recent videos that have been posted, along with it having its own page on the wiki. Very little is known about this guy, but it's clear that he low-key makes Nullscape a horror game. The limited footage we have shows a dark, lanky figure who chases your camera, not your player, which happens even if you haven't moved, and reportedly it even goes for your camera in free cam, getting you resulting in screen distortions, loud sounds, breathing, and a unique death message in chat, eventually resulting in getting kicked from the game. Like, what the heck? He's even referred to by question mark according to the wiki. He could very well be that secret pedestal I mentioned in my recent short. With this very limited knowledge, it seems that Visage is literally unavoidable, and he literally kicks you out of the game. But unfortunately, since we don't know enough about how he plays out in game and how to avoid him, I'll be putting him in our new unknown tier. That being said, I expect him to be in one of the highest spots on the unknown tier as a result of seeming genuinely unavoidable. Next, we're ranking literally the most hype enemy that Nullscape has to offer, or should I say, boss. The cat's out of the bag, the Celestial isn't a secret anymore, almost everyone knows about it, and my goodness is Celestial epic. Her dialogue is insanely world building, and leading up to the fight by activating the pylons is genuinely one of the most chaotic and exhilarating parts that this game has to offer, hands down. I've come really close to beating the Celestial, and I swear as soon as I do, I will be releasing a video of some form. But anyways, getting the patch 5 equivalent of real wings really doesn't make this fight that much easier. With crazy attacks, literal death lasers and rapid fire telegraphs, this fight is incredibly difficult to handle. Thank God you don't have to deal with the usual enemies, but you do need to avoid trip mines in standard. In phase 2, with the added pressure of new attacks along with the pylons, jeez. Universally, this is seen as arguably the hardest part of the game. I'll speak a bit more on the Celestial later, but I think for now, we have enough to rank her. Can you guess where the Celestial is going on this list? That's right, she's going in basically free. Literally the easiest enemy in the game. I could win the fight in my sleep. Okay, I'm trolling. Highest spot in the game. Hardest game this has to offer. Doesn't require much further explanation. Now, I cannot wait to talk about this one, and you guys might think my opinion is a bit weird on this one, but I stand by it. We're on to the question mark enemy. Yeah, seeing all those question marks on the bottom, you may not have realized I was going to rank the selectable enemy itself, but I really want to, for several reasons. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to this enemy by the name Random. Random is an enemy that, as of patch 5, will not show up unless every single enemy has already been chosen. Not just once, but at their maximum. For instance, Voidbreaker needs to have its max cap of 6, while Telefragger needs to also have its max stack of 6 as well, along with every single other enemy. This means that realistically, you won't start seeing this enemy, Random, until around level 50, which is the point by which you would have already reached and beaten the Celestial. Which, yes, if you didn't know, once the Celestial is beaten, you actually keep going. The hardest endgame levels are always going to feature Random, and once you reach the point that it shows up, you literally cannot pick anything else. And here's the thing, Random can be almost anything, Voidbound Guardian, Husk, or just a Mart. You never quite know what you're dealing with once you reach a high enough level, and also there is no cap for how many randoms you can have. To me, this literally tells me that there is no enemy more difficult than this one. It preys on vulnerability, surprise, and unpredictability, literally has no limit at all, and is literally one of the main things that make insanely high levels so difficult and chaotic, sometimes unplayable. To me, this earns it the hardest this game has to offer tier, and I'm going to go on a limb and say it's higher than Celestial. I say this because with Celestial, even with this insane difficulty, you eventually get used to the attacks because they're all the same. They become second nature the more you play the fight. Even in LRS, it gets very predictable. In fact, I'd argue the Celestial is easier if you're last man standing, since you know it's targeting you and can prepare accordingly, rather than never being certain who is being attacked by her. But with Random, you simply cannot predict it at all. You also cannot identify how many enemies there are by a certain point. For instance, in Extreme, the game literally hides it from you what enemies Random chose. Random is the most endgame that it gets for Nullscape, earning it the highest spot in this tier list. And to imagine that the devs are planning on changing Random to something even crazier, I wonder what that'll be. But I hope this opinion makes sense. Don't fry me for saying it's harder than Celestial, because yes, Celestial is the hardest part of the game, but objectively Random is the most endgame that this game gets, so I hope that makes some sense. Our next bonus enemy, or boss again in this case, is Catalyst. This is another one that I'm sure a lot of newer patch 5 players and possibly even some patch 4 players have never heard of. Believe it or not, this is the enemy that was actually replaced by the Celestial. In order to reach this enemy in patch 4, you had to get all the way to level 100, where by that point you were forced to pick Catalyst over Random. Just look at the animation for this thing. In game, once level 100 began, it would spawn in after 10 seconds and begin chasing. It had many attacks, dashing, spawning minions, shooting projectiles, buffed ICBMs that take the form of hands, screaming to increase its speed, teleporting to the nearest player, and much more. Isn't that an insanely long list? This is basically the previous boss of the game. Although I personally have not played against Catalyst despite starting the game when it was accessible, it's very clear to me that this is one of the hardest encounterable threats in the game at the time. I would love to be able to try and reach it in game somehow, but as of now it seems impossible. As of such, I will be putting Catalyst in the unknown tier, also mostly because I just don't have enough experience with it, but it is going to be at the highest spot in unknown, since it was literally the final boss of the game at the time. However, if I was to rank it, I would probably put it, I think slightly below Celestial, because it does seem like Celestial is very slightly higher pressure. Next is the solo exclusive secret enemy Ponderer. This is also a removed enemy which is actually replaced by Cadence. Accessible by typing Ponderer is back for blood when visiting Domas P, this enemy constantly counts down and only goes up if you're looking at him. If the number hits 0, he charges directly at you, killing on contact. This guy is goofy and there's currently no benefit to adding him to a solo run aside from spectacle and perhaps bragging rights, but honestly, after experimenting with him myself, aside from being really cool to see in game, he's rather annoying in endgame. Even if you're looking in his direction, his timer only goes up if you're close enough, and although he intentionally stalls after catching up to you, specifically turning around just to appease him while trying to deal with other enemies is genuinely terrible. He's not exactly difficult, but I generally find him to be a nuisance and not worth adding to a solo leaderboard attempt at all. Honestly, due to how he has clashed with enemies like Voidbreaker and Husk in my testing, I think he belongs kinda high. I'm putting him at the highest spot in somewhat difficult, as I believe his unpredictability and questionable mechanics are a lot more cumbersome than the predictable nature of entities like Voidbound Operator and Kolóna. Next, let's talk about the remaining 2 Greater Curse enemies. Starting with Razorbloom, this is arguably the most lenient enemy in the game. This is basically also the most commonly chosen Greater Curse in the game, and for good reason. Razorbloom has a relatively long warning before it starts screeching, and when it does, we have an entire 15 seconds to hit a jump pad, and even the decreased time in extreme, 10 seconds, is still really doable for a Greater Curse in my opinion. Honestly, I'd argue this is even more lenient than Operator, but this won't be going into basically free, since Razorbloom presents a lot of timing problems depending on if you're scaling a high rise, if you rolled an unlucky high roller alter chance, or otherwise cannot reach a jump pad. Aside from that though, Razorbloom is going into very easy. I consider it slightly less problematic than Mart due to Mart's curses, but slightly harder than Bell since it has more of a direct threat than Bell does. The next one is Oblivion. Now this one is definitely harder than Razorbloom and not as lenient. The entire bar can fill up in as little as 2.5 seconds if you are not above a platform. This Greater Curse is also very problematic if you're going for Celestial and need to activate pylons, as you're going to be in the air and not above ground for quite some time. Aside from that, this Greater Curse isn't the worst one in the world. It's not quite as easy as running Razorbloom, but it's still pretty bearable. However, it's still better to avoid it if at all possible if there are more favorable options. All things considered, there's not much more to say about it, at least for me. I think it deserves a somewhat difficult tier, relatively high due to its endgame difficulties for Celestial. I'm putting it below Ponderer and below Malfunction, as I find Malfunction to be a slightly harder pressure than Oblivion is. Nil is the next enemy we're covering. Nil has since been removed from the game and isn't even accessible in Chaos Mode anymore, since the devs have greater plans for Nil. I cannot wait to see what they have in store for this enemy, because honestly, I really miss Nil. But anyways, in case you didn't know, Nil used to be an enemy accessible by level 5, which would slowly materialize once near you with a purple vignette on your screen, screeching and charging at you once it gets too close. It only had one curse with a unique status effect called Insanity, creating fake sound cues and distorting your vision. But aside from that, this enemy really wasn't too bad. There were a lot of questionable or otherwise frustrating encounters with this guy, such as some spawn kills in my case, but I still found him not too bad regardless. He definitely belongs in somewhat difficult, but I'd place him relatively low. The spawn kills were my only problem with Nil, and I generally don't think it's too hard otherwise. I'll be putting Nil above ICBM in terms of difficulty, but I do consider Flesh slightly harder and more annoying than Nil was. Our very last enemy of the tier list is the Eye. This is one of the several scrapped enemies of this game, but the community happens to have enough information on this enemy that he happens to have an entire wiki page. Thank you so much to the wiki for being the main source for my information on the Eye, and some other entities of the video such as Visage and Catalyst. The Eye seems to be a slightly different version of Nil. Instead of steering clear of it like you had to do with Nil, instead the Eye would force you to touch it, and ignoring it is what would kill you instead. Now, because we have very little information on the Eye, it's hard to know what implications its requirements of survival would have in game. For example, would we need to touch it above ground? Do you need to reach it by hitting jump pads? Since according to the wiki it would spawn as early as level 1, I imagine we wouldn't have too much to fend it off, but it does seem like it might be one of the more problematic early game enemies. All of this is speculation though, so the Eye is definitely ending up in the unknown tier. It's going below Visage due to being early game, and not being nearly as demanding as that monstrosity clearly is. And you made it to the end. This is the final version of the tier list. How did your top 3 enemies do? Let me know in the comments. Basically, every enemy provides a unique, entertaining challenge that makes this game as interesting as it is, and I extend immense love to the dev team because man, I love this game, and that wouldn't be the case if not for these wonderful creations. With that though, that's all I got for this video. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope this was entertaining. I'll be uploading even crazier Nullscape content very soon regarding the Celestial, in-game challenges, helpful guides, and much more. Subscribe so you don't miss out. I might even be doing some collabs soon. I also wanted to extend a massive thank you to the community for the support of my recent Nullscape videos. Trust me, I feel the love, and I'm so glad my content is helpful for you guys. I cannot wait to make more videos. Until then, as always, live well and have a great day.